This week, Rachel Pollack's 1990s run on DC's Doom Patrol, a run that explored issues of sexual and gender identity, especially being trans, while also poking at some comic book tropes. Kumar and Emmet look back at this underappreciated run, and apologies for the sound quality on Kumar's mic. First, if you appreciate the work we do on deconstructing comics and our other podcasts and want bonus content, we'd love it if you'd support the show at patreon.com/deconcomics for as little as $2 a month. Our monthly issue-by-issue look at 1960s Amazing Spider-Man comics is available to patrons chipping in at least $4 a month. Coming at the end of this month, we discuss the final Steve Ditko issue. Check out our goals and rewards and pledge your support now at patreon.com/deconcomics.
This is Kumar.
And this is Emmet.
And this is Deconstructing Comics. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. I do it every time.
Take a drink, everybody. Take a drink.
There's a little bell that should get rung. It's the same bell we use for whenever anyone says Alan Moore, H.P. Lovecraft. Welcome to Deconstructing Comics. This is Kumar in the suburbs of Melbourne, Emmet way out in the outskirts, somewhere in country Victoria. Today we're talking about the Rachel Pollack run on Doom Patrol from the 90s. Now, I had no idea about the existence of this run of comics. But I have a very tentative relationship with Doom Patrol in the first place. So actually, it was almost exactly a year ago. I went through my emails. It was like 12, 13 months ago that I emailed you. So somehow I heard about this run. And I emailed you and I said, do you want to talk about the Rachel Pollack run on Doom Patrol? And you were like, yes, I'd love to. So you're already familiar with it, right?
Well, here's the thing. The Rachel Pollack run on Doom Patrol, I remember being on, I think it was the Gail Simone boards back in the day.
Okay.
You'll all be sorry. And I happened to mention that I was looking into getting them because they were always difficult to get. And in fact, it's only this year, 2022.
Yes.
My God, I almost tripped over that because I think it's 2020. No, it's 2022. We're missing time. It's only this year that they've announced they're collecting.
Yes, so the omnibus is out now, I think. But it wasn't, and it wasn't even, I didn't know there was going to be one a year ago when we started talking about this. Yeah.
I think all of a sudden people have started talking about Rachel Pollack a bit more in relation to Doom Patrol. Anyway, I mentioned on the Gail Simone board back in the day that I was interested in reading it. And this woman reached out to me and said, oh, she's a sister. And I was going, oh, really? And I was reading Doom Patrol. And then at one point, one of the characters says, oh, she's a sister. And I was like, because, like the whole trans community is something that I'm sort of peripherally aware of, and there's even little shibboleths and little ways of hinting at something that fly over my head. And had I been a teenager reading this, I think a lot of it would have been lost on me.
Oh, yeah.
And in the time since, the Pollock run on Doom Patrol, I think has become, as we've talked about before, particularly in relation to the Mr. Miracle comic, comics journalism isn't the toilet and terrible. But one feature of that terribleness is the willingness to get snide and sarcastic with anything that's weird and strange.
Mm-hmm.
And I was most familiar with Doom Patrol around that period because of various folks going online and posting a picture of the character Codpiece and going, oh, this was a weird comic book.
I think, as I was thinking about this today, going through the old emails, I was thinking, how did I find out about this? And I think it must have been, I had a really sinking feeling that it must have been on a list of the worst superheroes, and Codpiece was on there, and I must have seen the name Rachel Pollack and said, what is this, and what is this run of Doom Patrol that I've never heard of? I think that must have been it. Yeah, so it's a similar, I feel it must be a similar thing.
Which is a shame, because if you actually go and read that issue.
That is the funniest comic.
Yeah.
I read it twice.
So
I read it when I started reading the run. I read it again today. Every line is laugh out loud hilarious. in all the codpiece scenes. I just couldn't believe how great of a comic book it was, and it just sparkles completely. And but also reading it, I totally understood who the person was that would say this is a dumb superhero, just total tone deafness, unable to get the joke, because maybe they were the butt of the joke and didn't realize it.
That's an aspect to it. And the other thing too is, in the years since, I've become more familiar with Rachel Pollack from her writing on. Well, I've read her some of her novels. She's an extraordinary writer, and also her work on the tarot, which I think we've talked about in the past personally. But like, I don't subscribe to the tarot. I don't subscribe to mysticism really, but I do enjoy the idea of magic as metaphor. And certainly the way she writes about tarot, it clicked for me. Like, the sense of why these symbols and this system is so meaningful to so many people down through the years. Pollock actually is a fantastic writer in drawing out that meaningfulness. And I've read a couple of her books, particularly her book on the Heindel tarot deck, which I was really inspiring. I went and got the Heindel tarot deck because it's beautiful art. The artist is a German artist, and he sort of explored these themes of Norse mythology and Jewish mythology, and then represented that in single illustrations on cards. Like, it's really, beautiful piece of work. And she was working with Heindel, and she sort of promoted him and talked about him in her book. So I'm sort of becoming, the more I learn about her, the more fascinating she becomes to me. And then if you come to Doom Patrol with that sense of her as somebody who's this, somebody who's published in New Worlds, somebody who is an expert on the tarot, somebody who's clearly interested in Kabbalah, it lifts the material so much.
Yeah, I think she's a theme first kind of writer, and I think I found as I was reading them, especially the first bunch of issues, the stories just kind of end. There's kind of a structurally they just come to a conclusion. There's almost no climax. They just somehow there's some resolution on the last page, and that's kind of it.
No, there's never resolution.
Right.
That's great about it. There's never resolution.
Right.
Because weirdness will not be abated.
Yes.
That's what this series does. It never resolves to the status quo. It always bleeds into the next one.
Right.
And bleeding is such a continual metaphor in this run of comics.
Yeah.
I think this idea of, I think I made a note of it because, Morrison had the Doom Patrol like emerging from the wreckage.
Right.
And then Pollock has them sliding in the wreckage.
Yes.
The name of the title for issue 66.
Yeah.
And I love that. I love this idea of, no, we're just going to get weirder with this.
Yeah. I only read the Grant Morrison run within the last year. So I'd only, in the 90s, I'd read one issue because DC at some stage advertised that there was an ad in one of the Vertigo comics or somewhere that said this issue will be a good jumping on point for readers. I don't remember what issue it was. It was during the Grant Morrison run. And that was not a good jumping on point. That was false advertising on DC's part. I had no idea what was going on. But I finally read that run in the last year, probably, I think, because I knew this run, we would be reading this, and the TV show is out, which I haven't seen, but I thought, maybe I'll read the comic first and maybe then watch the show. And I found I think it was more impenetrable. It was harder to, it was more Dadaist. When weird minions show up and they speak nonsense, it's really hard to parse. I don't think you can parse. I don't think you're supposed to. Whereas I found with the Rachel Pollack stuff, when weird minions show up and start spouting nonsense, there are moments of poetry underneath it. There's more rhythm and music to it.
There's one here I love.
Yeah.
Come here and be liquid now.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's total Brian Geisen. I don't hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but that's sort of automatic writing.
Right.
Which a lot of people credit Morrison for. But you're right. Pollock does it differently. And then you've also got that amazing riff with the Cliff Steele robot man whose brain is now on a disk drive. which I was never happy with in the original Morrison run, but Pollock actually addressed that straight away.
Yeah.
So cut-up technique starts affecting Robot Man, and he starts saying things he's already said.
Right.
And I did wonder, did she get a word processor and put in all of Chris Steele's dialogue and then just cut it up?
Wow.
And then mix it up, and then that was the script? Because there are moments where it's like, that's an actual sustained thread of him speaking nonsense, but they're recognizable quotes from previous issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, that sort of approach, that the wit here is very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. But I will say, so we delayed recording this episode by a week. And then I went back to look at the issues. I went back to look at my notes, and my notes don't make any sense. Like, I've got a note. Here's my note on issue 74. Cliff on disc, comma, video game, comma, which is real Cliff, comma, drugs.
That is one of the best issues of the run.
It is.
But I was so like, good.
I'm looking at my notes going, what is this? What does any of this mean? All my notes are like this. They're all just meaningless gibberish. And I have to go back in and look at them again.
But you managed to actually sum up the issue.
I kind of did. The reason I wrote drugs was because of the experience when they turn up the dial of one of the copies of Cliff turns the dial up on his sensory perception. And so he has kind of
with everything.
Yeah, and he has this kind of drug experience, and that's why I wrote drugs. But I was like, why did I write drugs in my notes? And then I had to I opened the issue again and read it again. I was like, okay, this is what I must have been thinking at the time. But it's still.
I just want to put in quickly and say, we had a real Wayne's World moment there where I feel like I'm obliged to now say, dude, you just did a haiku.
Yeah, totally. So I think thematically it was like I had trouble. When I read essays about the Morrison run and people pull out the themes, I'm like, oh, that's what he was getting at. Sorry, that's what they were getting at.
That's what they were getting at, yeah.
Yeah. When I read the Pollock run, the themes were I understood the themes much more clearly. I feel like she was really focused, and I loved how tight it was, and we'll talk about all that stuff. But plot-wise, a week later, I couldn't remember all the Tiresias stuff. What was that about? What did they want? And all the stuff about the rabbi. And I was like, what was any of that storyline? I couldn't remember any of it a week later, but I remembered what the point of them was. So I felt like the weirdness of this run on Doom Patrol was very different from the Morrison run. Well, should I say very different? For me, it was emotionally a different experience. Let me put it that way, where I didn't really it was hard for me to get into that Morrison run.
You cited before when we were, going back and forth, that you were reading the Comics Journal interview with Pollock, and that came out a few months ago, and I remember reading it when they published it, and I thought it was a fantastic interview. And I'm familiar with Pollock as well. She's been appearing on a couple of podcasts recently as well, and so there was a lot of sort of chatter around her for some reason recently. And for those listening, at the time of recording, there's very sad news that Pollock had a bout of serious ill health, and now she's receiving care. And I think they had to set up a GoFundMe to try and raise some funds for her. And so, best
I can't believe this has to be done through GoFundMe. What is going on over there? It's
America, man.
Yeah.
And I really hope she's comfortable and she's. If she's with us for a long time, like that she's in a state where she is comfortable and not in any discomfort. Come on, swerve out of this one, Emmet. But I was really upset to hear that. And one of the reasons I'm upset to hear that is because I still feel like she's got so much to say.
Yes.
And I feel like we're only now starting to listen to her. Or people are now starting to listen to her. As I said, all of a sudden she was across all these podcasts, and I saw the Comics Journal interview. One of the points she made in an interview, which I thought was very generous, was, where she talks about trying to take that baton from Morrison and running with it. Like, she talks about how so many comic runs come in after the previous run, and then just try to flip everything, and deconstruct it. And I think there is a aspect of this run where the enemy of one of the storylines is deconstruction, where they strip everything back to clean it up. For somebody who lived in Amsterdam as Pollock did, I think presenting a version of Amsterdam which has been destroyed into little pieces of cutout cardboard that say baby, woman, government building. Or what was my favorite one? Hippie space cake. That was my favorite one. Hippie space cake. She didn't just take the baton and run with it. She actually, lapped the previous run and then just kept going.
Yeah.
And that's where I think she is underrated, certainly. But also, I'm not surprised that people didn't respond to it at the time, because I think she was giving the readership the benefit of the doubt and saying, all right, you want weird, here's some weird, which is extraordinary to read.
Yeah, but I still think for me, it was a more accessible weird. So I don't know why it didn't really succeed at the time. I guess Morrison was becoming kind of a superstar, and maybe he had that name recognition. I don't know. Like, I had never heard of Pollock before reading this, and then I read there was kind of a retrospective on them.us, and there was the TCJ article, and it's like, oh, she's written all these novels and was very active in the trans, rights movement in London, and was writing all about that and all these sorts of things, and has a 50-year history of writing, which I had no idea about. But seems like, much like Nancy Collins just kind of appeared at Vertigo, it just seems like people are meeting each other at parties, like meeting editors, and they're like, yeah, submit a sample, and then we're getting on these huge runs. And there were a lot of writers, it seemed like, that were like novelists and stuff that were showing up there that were just seemed like outsiders coming in or something. But certainly, like with the plotting, it seemed like she wasn't used to comic book plotting in the first maybe 10 issues or so. Maybe there was something in that in there. I also have to say, so we haven't talked much about the artists. So Richard Case from the Morrison run stays on for the first bunch. Then we get Linda Medley,
Incredible.
Amazing. So great.
Castle Waiting, Linda Medley is one of my favorite books.
So I somehow thought, as I always do in my ignorance, that she emerged fully formed with Castle Waiting. I didn't realize there was this run on Doom Patrol for several issues earlier, and probably other stuff that I have no idea about. But she has a really great run. Then we get this Ted McKeever run for the last 12 issues or so, and so she speaks very kindly of him in the TCG interview and talks about how well they gelled, but this is a very strange book, and Ted McKeever's art is very scratchy and abstract. It's like every panel's like nude descending a staircase, and it's very... You got to know what's happening in the panel. You got to have at least visually, if a building explodes, I need to know that that's what's happening in the panel. And I find it's very hard with Ted McKeever a lot of times to understand what's going on. And some very basic things like the character of Dorothy, who's supposed to have, quote unquote, like a monkey face, like she's supposed to have this very ugly face. All of McKeever's characters have ugly monkey faces. So that made it even harder to get into. It must have been a very difficult book, weird to look at and weird to read. On two levels would have been very difficult. I can see why there would have been resistance to that end of the run for sure, because I certainly was struggling. It wasn't until kind of going through the issues again I kind of had a better understanding of what was going on. And after reading the interview, and I kind of understood her relationship with him and why she liked his artwork so much, and the kind of dynamism of it, then I was okay. I kind of get it, but it just makes things harder, I felt. Agree, disagree?
No, I think that last issue in particular is such a fugue of images, and Pollock was really wrapping up the themes of the entire run and her own artistic project in terms of discussing Kabbalah and discussing magic. And there was something that occurred to me before about like the idea of Doom Patrol Pollock advances as well is that, it's where science fiction sort of bleeds into magic and it isn't too much one or too much the other. There's this very odd continuum between the two poles. And Pollock just really, is our tour guide on these concepts. But that last issue was difficult to read, I found. And in the interview, she talks about, McKeever just deciding not to do certain panels.
Yeah. Yeah.
He just decides, no, I don't feel like it. Which is interesting because I think another writer would have really bollocked him out for that.
Right.
But she doesn't. She actually says, well, we accommodated him, more or less. We found a solution because he's so brilliant.
Right.
So yeah, very generous collaborator, Rachel Pollack. But yeah, the Linda Mendeley stuff. I mean, it goes into that sort of mythological aspect and fairy tale aspect of the story just so neatly, skipping back and forth from one to the other. And then she talks about in the interview where this was actually inspired by a comic book she grew up with, the Fox and the Crow.
Crow, yeah.
And, she even sort of implies that this is similar to what Morrison did in Animal Man with the Coyote Gospel.
Yeah.
The Coyote Bible, rather. And I found that fascinating that, she sort of is throwing out references higgledy-piggledy, but they're not necessarily references that her readership would have picked up on.
Yeah.
But they're references. They're sourced. She's always pointing us to these things.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting that, this concept of magic as a game that's gotten out of hand in that storyline, but it's just a game.
Yeah.
There's something quite beautiful about that. I really love Medley stuff, and I love the feral children. I thought the depiction of the feral children was just incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. All that stuff was really great. I don't know if we should try to go into some of these plots. She ends up moving, the team ends up moving out. It starts out, they basically move out to once things are kind of settled. Well, she settles things initially by cutting off Calder's head. Niles Calder, the head of Doom Patrol, literally the head, ends up being decapitated, and his head is preserved. He's got no body, but he becomes a talking head for the rest of the series. And once all that's sorted out, they move out to like upstate New York somewhere, kind of a small town. So there's really a high degree of weirdness of the Doom Patrol concentrated in this small town. You can kind of imagine. It's kind of a great idea. There's all sorts of hilarity, like Calder asking for milkshakes, the head on a tray, like in Reanimator. And there's great moments, like when Cliff goes to the grocery store, a kid points and says, "Is that Michael Jackson, Mommy?" It was so good. Okay, and then suddenly issue 70. So she ran the series. Her run is from issue 64 to 87. So issue 70 is suddenly we get this issue drawn by Scott Eaton, which is the Codpiece issue, and introduces this character named Kate Godwin, who calls herself Coagula, because she has the power to she can make things coagulate and dissolve.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I never quite understood the coagulating part, because she seemed to be able to do it on things that weren't even liquid.
Yeah, but it's all of the things bleeding.
Yes, that's right.
And that's the recurring metaphor. And, her superhero origin is that her John one time was
Rebus
from the Morrison run.
Yeah.
And again, like I see that. I've made a note, Morrison Doom Patrol psychedelic folk.
Yeah.
Including the fact that you've got chapters of it named after the incredible string band songs. Pollock run, French jazz fusion, and I've written down Corfex Trompeau Bleu. Which is an amazing album, folks. First track, La Rue. It's great. You should listen to it. Go on Spotify right now. Or Bandcamp. Where people get more money. But that whole issue is that sort of funky jazz fusion feel, complete with... And let's have a flashback to Coagula, Kate, and Rebus just having an encounter, and she's then left with a Russian doll. And somehow that's connected to her powers. How is it connected to her powers? Don't worry about that.
I don't even think that ever comes back up again.
It's just again, it's a metaphor. It's it's a concept. It's an idea. It's who cares? Move on.
Yes.
Why does the little doll talk? Who knows? Who cares? Let's go on. We'll eventually find out what that's about. But he keeps saying, "I'll tell you later. I'll tell you later."
Right.
But yeah. She comes in, and there's this sort of teasing hints throughout the story that she's an out woman, that she goes to this bar, and then we close in on this badge on her jacket.
Yeah.
Trans lesbian for the Supreme Court. That's how we know. That's the reveal.
So
it's really fun.
It is, and so it was kind of pointed out on the Them.us retrospective. And I don't know where they got this information from, but they said that Rachel Pollack had instructed the artist to draw Kate as kind of broad-shouldered and like lean-hipped. And most of the artists failed at that. They just ignored her instructions and just drew her as a conventionally attractive blonde, as they say in the Them.us piece. I think Scott Eaton seems to get her right.
You see it with her introduction.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's kind of more broad-shouldered, more muscular than any of the other artists draw her. Ted McKeever, hardly matters how he draws anybody. They're just like scratchy lines. Anyway.
More discussion of Pollock's Doom Patrol coming up. But first, a reminder to join us for 20th Century TV and Music Trivia Quiz videos and more on our Patreon page. Every month, patrons donating $4 a month or more also get a full-length podcast episode reviewing an issue of The Amazing Spider-Man by Lee and Ditko, and will continue through the transition to John Romita Sr. Check out our goals and rewards at patreon.com/deconcomics. If you'd rather give a one-time donation, you can do so via PayPal by sending it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support. Edward and Alphonse Elric, as a result of attempting the forbidden act of resurrecting their mother with alchemy, have paid the price. Edward lost an arm and a leg. Alphonse lost his whole body, his soul now attached to a suit of armor. Together they search for a way to make their bodies complete again and uncover a deadly plot by their country's military rulers. That's the concept of Hiromu Arakawa's Fullmetal Alchemist, one of the best manga ever made. Tim and Patrick are rereading Arakawa's masterwork in search of interesting sound effects, translation errors, goofy humor, and, oh yeah, a great story. The podcast is The Law of Equivalent Exchange, a chapter-by-chapter look at the manga Fullmetal Alchemist. New episodes every other Monday, wherever podcasts are found. What are you willing to exchange? Okay, so we're introduced to this transsexual character, a superhero character, who ends up wearing a frog mask for weird reasons to fight the bad guy in this issue.
She had a frog mask.
She happened to have it handy. She didn't have her superhero costume, which she did have one. And she makes two superhero costumes. We can see her in two, and they're both really hilariously like boob window type.
Yeah, they're gendered costumes.
Yeah.
And she auditioned for the Justice League, and they turned her down. She's too weird for the Justice League, apparently. There was even a
really specific line about her rejection. I don't know if I'll be able to find it. Anyway,
it's part of that whole sequence where we're slowly being teased as to who Kate is.
Yes. They couldn't.
So it was yet another sort of
right. I suspect they liked my powers but couldn't handle me. Is what she says. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay, so this is the Codpiece issue. We have to talk about this guy because I love it. Oh, it's got a photo cover as well, which is just the kookiest, weirdest thing. I can't believe how perfect this is the perfect comic book. You got to find it. So it's this guy in high school. He says, "Why won't you go out with me? What's wrong with you?" This is the opening panel, and he's at in the hallway at the lockers, and he's talking to a girl. He says, "Why won't you go out with me? What's wrong with me?" She says, "You're not big enough." And her friend comes and says, "What did you say to him?" And the girl who rejected him says, "Oh, I don't know, that he was too short or something like that." He has automatically interpreted this as her talking about his penis, even though he says, "How could she know that? It's not my fault. I was just born that way." And everything that anyone says to him, he interprets it as being about his endowment. And his revenge is to create this. After we get 2 pages of him, like he even interprets when his doctor, he goes to a doctor to get a surgery on it to make it bigger. And the doctor's like, "I think you should get some therapy first." And he's like, "Oh, you want me to see a shrink? Are you telling me I should shrink down to the rest of my size or whatever?" So anyway, this guy, so he builds this suit. It looks like a He-Man action figure with this huge device on his chest, control device, and this huge cock, this red piece of technology. It's like a laser cannon or something. But actually, it's got like lattice hinged boxing gloves in it, giant scissors. It shoots missiles. It's got a drill that he uses to drill into a bank vault, and and he uses all these various weapons against the cops that show up. I just can't believe how great it is. Now, something we haven't mentioned is, so there's these other characters that show up. So the Doom Patrol's moved into this house, and there are already people in the house, including all of these people who died in sexual accidents. They're called, what were SRS, sexually remaindered something. I can't remember what they were, what it stood for. Anyway, they actually seem to be
spirits.
Spirits, okay. Sexually
remaindered spirits.
They're powering the house with their energy is powering the teleporter, the Doom Patrol's teleporter. Their sexual energy, it seems to be sex positivity is powering the teleporter, it seems like.
Yeah. Is the term orgone ever actually used?
I don't think so.
But that would be the concept. That would be the concept. Wilhelm Reich's Reich orgone. Yeah.
Right.
Which came up in The Invisibles as well.
Right. And there's also these 2 people called George and Marion who look like mummies or wrapped in bandages, because apparently the editor said Doom Patrol always has to have people, at least one character who's wrapped up in tape or bandages. So we don't really learn who they really are until later, but they have the ability, the power to whip these tapes, like to generate it and like shoot it all over people and tie them up and stuff. So they try to battle this guy first. And then Kate shows up. She sees this happening outside the window. She doesn't know what to do with her powers. She's been rejected by the JLA. And she puts on the frog mask because she has it handy because she had it for this party. And she walks up to him and she's like, "You're so amazing. I had to see you. Please don't be angry. You're just the most amazing man I've ever met." And he's like caught off guard by this. And then she coagulates him, his codpiece, and then dissolves it. And that's how she beats him, and then George and Marion invite her to join the Doom Patrol. And then we get an epilogue where we learn some secret history about Cliff's past and his accident that turned him into Robot Man. It's amazing the amount of stuff that's happening in this issue, and all the Codpiece stuff, as I said before. So even other people are hilarious too. I'm like, when he walks into the bank to steal, to rob it, one person's like, "Jesus, what the hell is that?" And one woman says, "I'd like to see his wife." And then another person says, "He must spend a fortune on condoms."
It's very Eric Idle. Say no more, say no more.
Yeah. It's oh yeah, and then one lady says, "Hey, Mr. D, give rides on that thing," and he says, "I'll give you a ride to hell. Get out of the way," like the Punisher or something. My God, the standalone issues in this series, especially, were so great. And maybe it's because the plots were easier to follow because they didn't go on for 4 issues of weirdness. It was just 1 issue of weirdness, and I could absorb it in one. They really hit me as being super great, even though she says she didn't really like them as much because she liked working on the longer stories.
But there also seems to be in this issue, like on top of the character, the sexually frustrated loner character who blames society for his ills, which, I think comic book fandom are very sensitive towards, because for so long they've been associated with that very trope.
Yeah.
The basement dwelling troll kind of character. On top of that, you also have a sequence which later comes up with Cliff, where it's George and Marion, isn't it?
Yeah.
When they invite Kate to join, they say, "Oh, join the Doom Patrol," and he's like, later on, he's going, "How are people just getting invited to join?" And you know, everyone's like, "Who are these people? Why are they just doing that?" And it's because, well, they're part of the team now,
Right.
and they get to do that, and they're loving, and they're accepting, and they see that this person needs a home. So, we've got this house, and you're in their house too. That's the other thing. The Doom Patrol is operating out of their house. So, if anything, they have every right to invite her to stay. So I thought that was interesting, and this sort of anticipated the sort of knee-jerk resentment of who are these new characters. Well, this is the story that you're in now. They are the ones who are part of the story. They're moving the plot along. Absolutely, they'll invite people to join off the bat. Why can't they? And then we've got Cliff having that flashback you mentioned, and the reveal about the fox and the role that the fox plays. And then later he has that moment where he's going, well, I thought I knew who I had to hate. And now you're telling me it's a completely different person, and none of it didn't mean anything.
Yeah.
You know, it was just a sequence of events that were magically ordained to happen.
Yeah.
Because of this childhood wish. Like, that's beautiful. But it also, again, is that idea of not just deconstructing something, not just flipping on its head, but actually twisting the knife a little more. You know? He wasn't just betrayed by the man he trusted. The man he trusted betrayed him because he made a wish in his childhood.
Yeah, he betrayed himself. Cliff is always... He doesn't know what to think. He's always not sure what he's supposed to think about things, about everything.
It's interesting that Cliff sort of had the role in the previous run of being the everyman character.
Yeah.
And in this run, Kate's the person we all look to. Kate's the one who's walking us through the plot.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, and he's the kind of the outsider. They're all kind of outsiders. You know, I was just thinking that as much as you want to dismiss Codpiece, thematically, a lot of the stories, all of them are about being in the wrong body.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful issue. I think it's just the way it's been received.
Yes, but even Codpiece himself believes he's kind of in the wrong body. He's supposed to be in a body with a bigger penis, is what he believes about himself. But being in the wrong body, it just comes up again and again. And Pollock, the genius of it, is she reveals that this theme has been here the whole time. And, you know, she gets, when she decapitates Calder, now Calder's not got a body. And in the annual, Marion and Dorothy actually go in there and laugh at him. Like, it's better to have a body than no body at all, because they go in and look at him and they're like, oh my God, look at this guy who's talking to a computer. He ends up attaching himself to Alice, who's one of the SRSs, on her stomach, like Quato from Total Recall almost. It's just a head on her belly, walking around. And, you know, there's so many issues about Cliff and his body. He ends up with a new body, and of course it all ties back to Kate. And that amazing line where he says to her, when he finds out that she's transsexual, he's like, well, you used to have a penis, so you're a man. And she's like, do you have a penis? And it's such a great moment. And then shortly after that, they're forced to share the same body in order to enter the realm where the Tiresias have been banished to, or is that what happened? I'm trying to remember if I'm remembering the plot correctly. But in order to go into this realm, it has to be done by someone who's male and female. Oh, that whole storyline it's about these ancient beings that were both or either. And they were the Tiresias, who were kind of fluid. And then these people called the Builders came along, and they said that everything had to be defined, one thing or the other. And they codified everything. And the idea is kind of that as soon as you codify everything, change stops. You can't really change anymore. You're stuck with things the way they are. So in order to enter this realm where they are, you have to be male and female. And Kate can't go in there herself because she's only female. Yeah. Which is kind of a great little point in there. And then they merge and they go in there. So it just keeps coming back up over and over again. This thematically, I thought that was really strong to me. That was like the best. Like I said, I think she's theme first, and I think I love the way the stories work around. Like she found all those threads that were kind of already there.
Yeah, and I the other sort of body theme that keeps coming up is the theme of menstruation.
Yes.
And, just as Codpiece is, identified as being male because of his penis and the obsession with his penis, the raven? Sorry, the crow?
Crow.
The crow talks to Dorothy about, well, you are a mother because you give birth to stories.
Yes.
And I found that really interesting because a mother here isn't just a woman who gives birth to children. A mother can give birth to stories.
Yeah.
Which again also sort of, because that idea of menstruating women is something that like the anti-trans movement really cling to, because that's then a singular definition of what a woman is.
Yeah.
A woman menstruates. So I guess after you stop menstruating, you're no longer a woman.
Or before.
Something Kate would probably say.
Yeah.
So here in this comic, well, no, mothers also can birth stories, and I think that's a beautiful broadening of the concept, broadening of the category, which again is the point of weirdness in this series. It broadens, it opens up, it makes things more. What was the again? I'll go back to the first issue. All that automatic writing, Here we go. The fish crack on the gate splits cows and calves and sows and slits.
Yeah, right.
It's just, it keeps going back to this idea of menstruation, of genitals, of vaginas, and just does it in a way that is just kind of winking at you, the reader. Hence the automatic writing, I guess. But I really enjoy it. I really love how Magnus can't figure out why Dorothy's powers are acting up at certain times of the month. Like he just can't figure it out.
Right.
And then like when they move to upstate New York, it's more or less, let's get the hell away from Magnus. He's just he's too straight. He's so straight, he's boring.
Yeah, I found this bit at the end of the Tiresias segment, too. So after they've beaten the builders, who are, quote-unquote, the bad guys, who are trying to codify and define everything and separate everything into fixed forms, the Tiresians decide that they need to destroy the world to make it changeable again, because things aren't changing anymore. And it's Kate who says, no, things change here all the time. And she says, look at me, I changed my body to match my vision, my desire. You can change easier than I can blink, but so what? I did it, I made it happen. So her thing is, change is still possible. And in the annual, I think one of the wild, somebody says children can change their form if they really want to. And I think even when Cliff gets his new body, it's built supposedly according to his own specifications. Yeah, so there's a lot about taking control of the body you've been born into and changing it into the body you want it to be. Yeah, and that's kind of something that Dorothy is fighting all the time, because she's 14, and she's always, whenever periods happen, the creations that she builds out of her mind get supposedly worse, and she's constantly fighting it. And there are people, the support network is always like, don't worry about it, everything's okay. And it's Calder is the problem that's always saying you got to keep it under control.
Yeah, Calder almost enjoys not having a body, because then he just gets to be a mind.
Yes.
Even though he's still, it's a beautiful metaphor, despite the fact that he's this pure rational being, as Cliff says, he's the head of the Doom Patrol.
Yes.
He keeps having to guzzle down liquids.
Yes.
Like he betrays himself. Like he still is a body. Even if he's just a head. He's just a head. He still needs to take in liquids. He still needs to eat. He needs to consume. He's an orifice.
Yes.
So he betrays himself each time. He just wants to be this pure thinking entity. And, there is a long history of Doom Patrol and X-Men and the back and forth between them and whether or not one ripped off the other and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
I had a thought. When Calder is in his frozen vat, when he's in that sort of icy psycho space, while he's cryogenically frozen, and Dorothy's sort of wild unconscious dreams go to visit him, it reminded me so much of the television show Legion.
Right.
And there's a character in Legion called Oliver, and he's played by Jermaine Clement.
Okay.
And he's cryogenically frozen, and the characters have to go into his psyche to convince him to come out. And he's in this ice palace. And he's preserved in age, and he still thinks it's the 1960s. And it's Jermaine Clement, so he plays it really, it's just so funny. But I did wonder if Noah Hawley had read this.
Right.
And that was an influence on Calder's state, was an influence on Oliver, because they're very similar. But yeah, once Calder does allow himself to be put in an ice tray and wheeled around, I thought it interesting that he had a voice command Google machine at one point.
Yeah.
He just becomes a joke.
Yeah, and he also finds out that he's not smart for the reason he thought. Like, he found that mystical cup, and that was that there was something there, wasn't there, that had given him his intelligence or something, or what was?
Yeah, the thing gets taken away from him.
Yeah.
Before the end. He's a stooge. He was a plot device almost.
Yeah.
The fact that he ruined the Doom Patrol's lives so that they would become superheroes in the Morrison run. Yeah. Now he gets himself deconstructed in this one.
Right.
Which again, like so much of it is a more playful understanding of what deconstructing is in this comic. That's one of the joys of it for me. Yeah, I think it's there's something I had here. Yeah, the deconstructing metaphor, strip mining down among the underpinnings. That's the Amsterdam sequence. This idea of going down, down, down. It's was it somebody got their powers from being in a superhero convention with wish fulfillment fantasies?
Oh yeah, is it Identity Addict or something? I think they called him. Very weird run. That's one of the ones that I read this and then I was like, and then I went back through my notes. I was like, I don't remember any of this kind of stuff, but yeah, he was going through a bunch of identities or something. And that was very close to the Morrison run. It was at the start of the Pollock run. I think she was kind of channeling Morrison a bit more at that stage of the game.
Do you know who else I reckon riffed on that though? China Miéville's Dial H for, I think it's just called Dial H, isn't it? But Dial H for Hero. Yeah, very similar. Just the concepts behind the different superheroes that were manifested, death and taxes, just it's almost like let's create superhero identities for puns, Right. But yeah, it is also a feature of the Morrison run with the Crazy Jane personalities.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Another one I wanted to throw at you.
Yeah.
The cover for issue 65.
Okay.
Do we think that's a reference to the Gnome King from Return to Oz? It's an image of Calder.
Oh, wow. Okay. If you'd asked me 10 hours ago, I would have said, I'm not so sure. But after reading that Comics Journal interview this afternoon, she was riffing on a lot of stuff that people didn't pick up. And it really could be. It really looks like it, doesn't it?
It looks so much like it.
Yeah.
I've forgotten the name of the actor. 1 second. Yeah, Nicole Williamson.
Okay.
He plays the psychiatrist in Return to Oz, but then he comes back as the Gnome King.
Right.
And yeah, that sort of cavernous face.
Yeah.
The rocky, porous skin. Yeah, it's very similar to me.
Yeah. One of the other one-off issues I wanted to talk about was the one with the lady who implants false memories in people. 83. Right. So I guess she was a holdover from the Morrison run. I didn't remember her, which is ironic because she's all about memories. But it's just a standalone issue where this woman shows up and she just walks up to people and she plants mostly pleasant memories in them that are false, that didn't happen to them, and they have trouble putting them together in their head. Like, for example, she tells one couple that they remember when you hung out with Marilyn Monroe and George Bush and played horseshoes with them. And they're like, oh, yeah, how could I have forgotten that? That's a great memory. But wait, how could those people have been together at the same place? And the false memory, her name is false memory. She says, oh, don't worry about that. You remember it. So it really happened. And then she plants these false memories in the Doom Patrol. And it's quite interesting because Kate and Dorothy are the two that resist. And Kate, she plants a memory in Kate that many years ago, she was married to a man who assaulted her. And she says, this is the reason why you have unresolved feelings now, is because of this incident from her past. And Kate is like, why isn't this adding up? I don't remember marrying this guy or anything like that. And of course, it would have had to have been from before her transition. And Dorothy somehow just is like, it just doesn't add up for her. Does she even try to put, maybe Dorothy doesn't allow her to put memories into her somehow. But Cliff, of course, really falls hard for it because he gets lots of memories of Jane. I really dug this issue. Again, it's partly because it's a standalone, so I could absorb it, a lot easier than the 4 or 5 issue storylines. But boy, there was something, we've seen this kind of thing before in lots of science fiction and fantasy shows or comics where people have to fight off false memories or something like that. But somehow here it was really tight, the way false memory got all of those characters and how they almost fell for it. And finally, there has to be a little bit of magic from Calder and Alice, who's merged with Alice. They have to do a bit of kind of, I don't know, some kind of abracadabra on Cliff to get him to snap out of it. And that's how they finally all get out of it. But that was an emotional issue too for me. I responded to that one.
It's such a brilliant sort of discussion of the idea of retro continuity in comic books.
That too, yes.
As well, that an idea of, oh, don't you remember?
Yeah.
Remember that thing? Remember that traumatic event that actually defined everything you did? Like, which is the whole point of Kate's exchange with what's her name? Forget Me Not. False Memory. Yes, sorry. Forget Me Not is an X-Men character who has the same ability. But no one ever remembers him. That's what his thing is. He's the opposite.
Right.
Kate's going, why would you put this in my head? And she's going, well, it gave your life more meaning.
Yeah.
So, again, there's always that idea of, we need to take this character who everybody loves, and I've now got control over, and I'm going to put them through some trauma because that gives us stakes.
Right.
Which is actually a bad writing rule.
Yeah.
Because it's not a universal application.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work. I thought that was a nice sort of piss take off. I think that's very common to the Vertigo era. Take this concept, take this character we've got in mothballs, make them a little more funky, make them a little more punk, give them some trauma, preferably sexual trauma. Let's go, and it's like, so many times people didn't have the nuance to actually.
You're so right.
That,
Yeah, you're so right. It really does point to that device, that cheap device.
No, but you're right. It's a very well done, self-contained, clever, heartfelt comic.
Yeah. So I think we're not a slightly short episode. We're at about an hour, but I think it's kind of hard to talk about. In a way, hard to summarize. Let me put it that way. Hard to summarize.
How have we got through this entire conversation without talking about how Niles Calder anticipates the robotic Philip K. Dick head that got lost in an airplane.
Oh my God! Yeah. Well, yeah.
Because folks, that actually happened.
Yeah.
You should look it up. The guy left Philip K. Dick's robotic head in the overhead compartment.
It was never found. Oh my God! Yeah. Okay. So I just want to say. I just want to mention that we've got a run of covers. Some interesting covers. Kyle Baker had a run. Bob Fingerman had a run of covers. Oddly, Ted McKeever's first issue has a Boland cover, which that's a real bait and switch right there, people. But I just want to say the last thing I wanted to say was I had a note. My note on issue 84. Here we go. This beats the one about Cliff on Disc video game. Issue 84. Resurrected Rabbi, comma, bird, costumes, in quotation marks, comma, faith healing, comma, toothpicks, question mark.
This is like poetry, man.
I still don't know what, I'm looking at my notes, I don't know what happened in that issue. Based on these, why did I write toothpicks, question mark?
Toothpicks, question mark?
Yeah.
I love it.
And that kind of sums up how I felt about a lot of this the run, I guess, because it was poetic and heartfelt and a heady run. I liked it more than the Morrison run, which I read a year ago.
That's beautiful, man. I'm glad that it's finally been collected. When you talked about the toothpicks, are you perhaps talking about the Tree of Life symbol?
I think I don't know. I think maybe McKeever might have tried to draw some toothpicks for some reason. They looked like sticks, like branches or something. I don't know. I'll have to. Why would I write toothpicks, question mark? Oh, no. I'm just flipping through it now. God, it's strange. So strange. I don't know why I wrote it. Another note I wrote was Cowboy Doll Bookface, which is a character that Dorothy comes up with, which is a cowboy whose face is a book. Craziest thing I've ever seen in a comic book.
Again, folks, if you're reading Rachel Pollack and Richard Case and Linda Medley's Doom Patrol, I strongly recommend if you can find Cortex by Trompeau Bleu and put that on the background, it will make the experience so good. There's your musical accompaniment. Trompeau Bleu. Cortex.
Oh, Cowboy Doll Bookface is also, I'm just looking at him now in issue 80. He's made of dolls. So his body is just like a mass of dolls fused together. His face is books. And he's got, his face is a book with the pages flapping open. And he's got a cowboy hat and cowboy boots. Cowboy Doll Bookface.
This is like when you try to talk about your dreams to somebody.
Yeah. No, worse. I can kind of, because you only remember a moment of your dream, and it's like, yeah, this weird thing happened, and that's weird, okay, no, this is beyond any. This is really fascinating, weird stuff. Anyway, it's finally available again after a long absence with the omnibus that came out this year, along with the Nancy Cullen Swamp Thing last year. So there you go. Did you want to have any last words?
I just really enjoyed talking to you about this. I really enjoyed revisiting this run. If folks out there are curious about Pollack's writing, can I also recommend her novel, The Unquenchable Fire, which again riffs on a lot of these themes and these ideas of religion and mysticism and the possibility. It's a sort of alternate history of the United States where magic is in the ascendant. Really strange book, but really I'd recommend it. And you were asking before about where all these writers were coming from this period, and they're all meeting at parties and stuff. I think Tom Payer had an eye on who the good speculative fiction writers were in that time, and I'm sure they all were interested in getting to comics. Like they would actually have enjoyed this idea of comics becoming recognized for their imaginative capacity, and all these writers would have been up for that challenge. There was the idea that we have to credit Neil Gaiman, and also here's our one per episode, Alan Moore, for a lot of this in terms of the literariness of comic books at that time. But people like Pollock would have been looking at the scene and going, well, I can do that, you know.
Yeah.
And I can.
Well, she said in her TCJ interview that she connected with Doom Patrol already, and only Doom Patrol.
She's known
That's
for
the
it.
only one she's. Yeah.
She's known for it. And we should mention as well that interview with Pollock was published in the Comics Journal on May 2022. It's by Alex Dubin. Strongly recommended. It's a great interview.
We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, worth read. But yeah, just that idea of which he talks about in the interview about there was a more commercial instinct that then came in.
Yeah.
Where they were looking at these properties and saying, okay, how can we develop these into, intermedia product? And absolutely, you can't contain this in a Hollywood movie. But, if you do eventually end up watching the Doom Patrol show, aspects of our run are popping up in that.
Okay.
Yeah. Ideas from the Pollock. So there's a lot of Morrison. It's mostly the Morrison stuff.
Yeah.
John Byrne must be spinning in his armchair.
Yeah. So Byrne came after Pollock. He retroed everything after Pollock, right?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
Well, that's what he does.
Yeah,
that's what he does. It was a Doom bot.
It was a
Doom Patrol.
I just saw. I think I saw some covers, and it was like, was this after the Pollock? Like immediately after, and it was like, yeah, he must have hated this run of comics, both runs, the Morrison run and the Pollock run. He must be like, I'm going to make this the way it's supposed to be, and just from what I saw of the covers, it looked really ordinary.
And here's the thing, no one was interested in reading that comic anymore. That's why the likes of Morrison got to do that to it. Yeah. Because no one was reading the damn thing.
Yeah.
So make it interesting, make it weird, and then you have that little corner of the universe for those weird things, but no, instead they just flattened everything out.
Yeah.
And every now and then you've got flashes of other people coming back to it, like Jared Way recently did a run on Doom Patrol.
Okay.
Where he was trying to channel the Morrison spirit, very clearly indebted to Morrison. Their relationship is, very collaborative.
Right.
So I can see Way, looking to that era and trying to bring it back. But it wasn't quite the same. Pollock, I think, she has more esoterica to draw on, let's say.
Right.
Yeah, she's written the book, literally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doom Patrol by Rachel Pollack Omnibus is published by DC. You can help the Deconstructing Comics family of podcasts by joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. And go to deconstructingcomics.com to connect to us on Twitter, Facebook, or YouTube, to shop on Amazon to support the show, and to find links to subscribe to the podcast. Our theme is by J.B. Anderton. The Bebop, an anthology comic that our own Emmet had a part in, is being kickstarted again. As this episode is being released, you have about 24 hours left to support it. You can find the link in this episode's show notes. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and we'll critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read it and record our critique. Next week, a look at another graphic novel from our friends at Avery Hill Publishing. Jason and I discuss Senin by Shanti Rai, a book encompassing both coming of age and recognition of global inequality issues. I'll also talk with Shanti herself about the book, which feels a bit like sci-fi, but it's more of a fantasy analogous to real life. Catch our look at this interesting OGN next week. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.